Let's go. So I wanted to do this video because I think the type of surfboards I surf are a bit unusual, especially for people kind of my size. And since I don't think there's so much good information out there, kind of what you see a lot is short performance surfboards, so I thought I'd add kind of my perspective to that. So all of my surfboards are custom shapes, and they're all quite big and quite strong. For reference, I'm 165 centimeters and around 55 kilo. And another thing about all of my surfboards is they're all extra strongly glassed, because I surf in Portugal and the waves are quite strong and I like to surf a little bit bigger waves. And maybe something else is that because I already pay a couple of €100 for every single surfboard, I do like them to be beautiful, because I live in a really small house, so they're always on display. So I do invest a little bit extra into having tinted resin in a custom color that I really like, because I think it's nice to have a beautiful piece of art in your home as well. Right, this is the first one. It's a single fin surfboard and probably the one I surf most often. It's around 6.5 foot. I don't know exactly how big it is, around 35 to 40 liters. And it's hand-shaped by this Indonesian guy called Hantoro. We actually hand-shaped it together when I was there during the pandemic.
Yeah, like that.
Like this?
Yes.
And they also hand make the fins, which is the best single fin I've ever had. It's really big, it's really strong. And he let me cut out the shape originally from a block, and then we kind of finished it off together, which was a nice process. So it doesn't have too much of a rocker. It's quite wide for me. It has quite a lot of volume. But when we shaped it, what was important for us was that it has really, really good rails here in the back. So I can still surf it in a bit bigger waves. Hoi baby, hello. In a bit bigger waves. It holds in barrels actually. Haven't caught too many of those, but it works. So it's not really made for tiny waves, to be honest. So when it's really small, I surf a longboard. But the point was that, yeah, it doesn't break in bigger waves. And the shaper is an artist, so I showed him some photos of her actually. And I said I would like it to be the color of my dog. And he didn't laugh, he didn't question it. He just made it exactly in her color. The next one is this one. It's a 7-foot board, and probably the most important. If I had to choose only one surfboard that I could surf, it would be this one. And it's actually the 4th time I made a copy of this, because the first one was a second-hand one I got from a friend of mine. And then over the last almost 10 years, whenever it snapped, I immediately made a direct copy of the surfboard. So you can see it's quite tall. If I put it behind me. But it's really, really slim. It's not too thin, but it's really, really slim if you see it underneath my arm. So it only has 35 liters, which is not a lot for a 7-foot board. Again, it's super strongly glassed, and yeah, it's the best board I've ever surfed, to be honest. Most of my best waves were caught on this board. And then the last one is my gun. This one is actually the board I surfed the least, but I got some really, really good waves on this one. Probably the most memorable waves I got on this board. So I got really few waves on this board. I surfed it maybe in total 5 times or so only. I surf it maybe twice per winter season, 3 times if I'm lucky. It's my most expensive board for sure. It's glassed extremely strong. It's 9'6", so you can see. If I put it behind me, it's huge. And it's really heavy as well. So I have some difficulty carrying it, but again, it's very, very slim. You can see it on my arm. I really like slim boards, so it holds really well in kind of steeper waves as well. I haven't surfed it on massive waves yet, to be honest, but I surfed it on a little bit bigger waves. And I surf it on, it's kind of like my practice gun. I surf it on big, easy waves of little consequence. And yeah, it's a normal, I surf it as a normal thruster setup. Large fins usually on all surfboards. So when I started surfing guns, I was really grateful that I had been longboarding for a couple of years, because I loved surfing a little bit bigger waves. But the feeling of dropping on a gun for me is exactly the same as on a longboard. So it actually kind of felt like going back to my roots a little bit, and I really, really enjoyed it. It paddles amazing. It's an amazing board. Since all of my boards are stronger glass, they're quite heavy. But for the type of waves I surf, I don't need them to be light at all. To be honest, I never really understood why people want such extremely light boards. Because at least in Portugal, they break easily, and I don't do airs anyway. So I like heavy boards, rather heavy boards, because they, like I said, they don't break, and they actually help me enter in the wave. And I feel like I have more flow on the wave instead when they're very light and kind of jittery, because we hardly have really, really perfect waves. Enough about surfboards. Let's talk a bit about the rest of the gear. The first one is quite basic. It's leashes. And for the 2 smaller boards, I always use really good strong leashes. And most of the time I just use leash that is a foot bigger than the surfboard I'm using. So for the single fin, it's a 7 or 8 foot leash, depending on the size of the waves that day. And for the 7-foot board, it's an 8-foot leash. Then for the gun, for the 9'6", I use a really big leash, which is 12 foot. And it's in the board. So it's a super, super strong one, and it has a quick release, because not on the gun, but on a smaller leash actually, there was a single day in my life where I was stuck underwater with a leash, and I had to take it off. And I think when the waves are a bit bigger, it's more tricky, so this was expensive. One thing also is because I don't duck dive these boards. Sometimes the 2 smaller ones, I try to duck dive, or when the wave is perfect, but especially the bigger one, forget about it. So I really need to rely on a good leash, on a bigger leash, to not lose my board. All right, next thing is an impact suit, is the one from Patagonia that almost everyone has. And I really like using it. It doesn't bother me at all, and I really like paddling with it, because it kind of protects you in all the places. It gives a little bit of extra warmth as well, which I really like in Portugal. And it brings you a bit faster to the surface, and I don't know, it just gives you a bit of extra confidence. So I really, really like using it. Then also recently I started using a helmet, finally. And I haven't used it on too many surfs yet, but so far I was surprised that I kind of forgot about it. It didn't bother me at all, and I think especially on bigger days, or with more people in the water, or heavier boards, it makes all the sense in the world to use a helmet. All right, last point is the wetsuits, and these are identical. One is 5mm, one is 4mm. Let me check. This one's 4, and this one This one is a 5mm suit. Both of them are size medium. Sometimes it's a women's size. Sometimes I also use men's suit in like an extra small. Kind of depends a bit on the model if it works for me or not. And when it's a bit colder, I also put an additional shirt with a hood, because I really, really like surfing with a hood. First of all, because it keeps the hair kind of away and it protects my ears a little bit, so I really like it. I surf with a hood, I would say 80–90% of the time, even though when it's quite warm. And in general, I'm someone I like to use warm wetsuits all the time. Even in the tropics, to be honest, I surf with a wetsuit. So in the tropics, I would surf probably with a 1mm or 2mm, because for me, it's rather than just the warmth, it's kind of also an armor that protects you, that brings you faster to the surface. So I never understood what's so nice about surfing in a bikini, to be honest. But I really enjoy surfing in a wetsuit. And I think that's all.